Tonight, the presidential race heats up here in Virginia with a matchup between the independent and third party candidates for president on Virginia's ballot. And it all comes down to you live on SchezzWho, Hampton Road's top spot for politics.
Via 538's polling, this historic race currently has Kamala Harris up on 6 points over Trump at 49.6 to his 42.8. Now this leaves over 7 points still to be fought for Virginia.
Now that number will vary from state to state, but as we get closer to election day, the race's volatility may hinge on the electorate being able to fully appreciate their ballot in front of them. The SchezzWho Arrington Gavin podcast, third party independent debate begins right now. So good evening. I'm Conrad SchezzWho, host of SchezzWho.
And I am Arrington Gavin, host of the weeknight program, The Arrington Gavin Show.
Excellent. Make sure that you guys tune into that over the next few nights. Our Smooth Club Media is the channel for that. Now, this show is important for those who do not have high confidence in either Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president, or Kamala Harris, the Democrat nominee for president. We're 42 days out from the election day, and early voting has already begun here in Virginia.
Now, this brings us to the format of today's debate. Now, 1 hour in length at the most, with no pauses for commercials. Topics were given to the candidates and candidate representatives in advance, as this stems the Harris-Trump debate not long ago. The guests will be granted 2 minutes to answer questions, with rebuttal or adjourns being granted in important cases.
Now, tonight we will have on Chase Oliver, the Libertarian nominee for president. Tom Yager, representing the Green Party of Virginia, who will represent Jill Stein for president's campaign tonight. And when she taps in, Nikia Miller, admittedly not a part of the Dr. Cornel West campaign, but will instead be advocating for him here tonight. For ladies first, we would begin with Nikia when she jumps on. Then we'll move on to Mr. Tom, then to Mr. Chase, to keep it in that order. So we're going to bring on the guest, as you see there at the bottom, and lead off with the first question tonight, Mr. Harrington.
And again, I want to thank you both for coming, guys. Thank you all, and wonderful to meet you as well. Let's tackle the first issue, the economy. Cost of living in 2023 and 2024 is painfully high. Now, Trump likes to ask his supporters if they're better off now than 4 years ago, a dig at the Harris campaign. Let's include the previous 4 years during Trump as well. Do you believe we're better off now than in the previous 8 years? We'll start off with Mr. Yager.
Well, there was a modest increase in median family income since 2016, although from 2016 to about 2020 or so. But part of that has been eaten up by inflation, and not everyone has actually gained since then. To look at the big picture, now look back a little further. If you look back from, let's say, 1955 to 1975, the increase in median family income in those 20 years is bigger than the increase between 1975 and now. There's actually a bigger increase in those 20 years than there was in the next 50 years. And that's not because we've become less productive. Productivity has kept going up, actually. And historically, the relationship was that between when labor productivity went up, wages would go up almost by the same amount. But that has not been the case over the past few decades. A lot of it has actually been going into increased profits and increased, and it's been funneling further and further upward. And you even see, for example, the top 0.1% has gained a lot more than the top 1%, and then the top 0.01% has actually gained a lot more than the 0.1%. And now we have young people who are basically getting more and more reluctant to form families. It's more difficult for them because basically of increased healthcare and housing costs. and like in education. What Jill Stein's campaign wants to do is to make things better on the cost side equation by offering Medicare for all and free college, and also for and affordable housing. And on the other side of the equation, we want to increase salaries. We want to increase unionization rates, and we want to make it easier for people to form unions. So, and also to raise the minimum wage.
Okay, Mr. Oliver.
Well, I think the answer to me is no. I don't think people are better off than they were years ago, and this is because much of it has to do with the way our politics works. It's a two-party system that's been gamed rather for the gain of those who are at the very top. We are more polarized, more divided. We are continuing to be at war. We're continuing to spend trillions of dollars a year on deficit and debt spending, which is the primary driver of inflation. When we print trillions of dollars a year out of fiat currency each year, it devalues the dollar that's in your pocket, whether it's in your savings account, it's in your business, or it's in your wallet right now. Americans are feeling that pinch. Every week when they go to the grocery store, they see prices rising much faster than their wages, much faster than their household income. And, the idea that it's only corporate greed, which is what you're getting out of Kamala Harris, is just not true. Corporations were greedy 5 years ago. They will be greedy 5 years from now. They are driven by a profit motive. It's not like as if all of a sudden corporations were like, hey, we're going to make everything more expensive for people. It has to do with supply chain crunches that were caused, much of it by the pandemic. We're still recovering from those things. But then also inflation, which has continued to be a problem, not just through the Biden administration, but also through the Trump administration before it, and the Obama administration before that, and the Bush administration before that. The last time we had a balanced budget was in the 90s under Bill Clinton, which was also the last time we had a really productive, growing middle class anyway. That is like, it's like the last time we had a major explosion in the middle class was during that decade. And it's because people saw our government putting its fiscal house in order, and people had more confidence in the economy going forward, that we're not just going to be seeing prices increasing year over year over year over year in a way that is heavily affecting the pocketbooks of Americans. I want to balance our federal budget. I want to cut out the excess spending so we quit printing these trillions of dollars a year out of thin air and actually provide real economic relief for American families who are suffering from the pinch of inflation.
Now, in the debate between Harris and Trump, Harris brought up Trump's call for large-scale tariffs. Now, Trump would go on to defend this idea by saying no prices would go up, save for ones in China and other countries. Then he lambasted Harris for inflation. So how do you view inflation and proposed policies like tariffs from a standpoint outside the two major candidates, Mr. Yager?
Well, for us, we really don't view that large-scale tariffs as the answer to this issue. What we want to do overall is, as I said previously, is to lower costs for people through Medicare for all, through making housing more affordable, and through free college, things like that. We make it easier to afford these things, and we want to make and for us, we also want to make it easier for local economies to develop. Right now, what we have now is that we import things from thousands of miles away, and yes, this is in some cases necessary, but we want to actually make things easier to develop local economies, so that won't be quite so necessary.
On to you, Mr. Chase.
Well, let me just say, as somebody who I spent years working in the maritime trading industry, moving goods from one part of the world and importing it into the United States, and then using our supply chain to bring those goods to the final marketplace where you or I would buy those goods. I see how the supply chain employs people, and I see how tariffs affect both the supply chain and those who are bringing goods into the United States, as well as consumers at the bottom line. Tariffs are a tax on consumers. China does not pay tariffs. The people who buy Chinese goods, businesses, or you as a consumer, pay the tariff. It's not punishing China, it's punishing you. It's making goods more expensive. And Donald Trump can say, oh, it won't increase prices, but that is voodoo economics. That is just not true. It does not work. And so for me, I want to see us tearing down these tariff barriers, enforcing actual free trade, and seeing the power of the marketplace and not relying on protectionism to move our economy forward, because it won't move our economy forward. It will actually stagnate our economy and make for less choices for consumers across the board. So I am somebody who will absolutely oppose these tariffs and understand that they will not be a tool that stops inflation. In fact, they will be a tool that will have prices rising, punishing particularly small businesses and individual consumers who are the lowest on the economic ladder rungs, rather. And, you know, it's not good business for the United States to be engaging in this kind of protectionism. So I would absolutely oppose it. And that comes from the standpoint of not just as a libertarian, but as somebody who's worked in the maritime trading industry and sees how many jobs are created by bringing goods into the United States through the supply chain.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's turn to abortion. Very hard discussion, really, on both ends, on multiple sides of the aisle. Trump highlights killing Roe v. Wade. He's proud of being pro-life, he says, but he flip-flops on voting for or supporting stringent bans in his state of Florida. Now, Harris says women shouldn't trust Trump on this issue, but how much should women also trust Harris? This Democrat Party has been in power both now and before with strong legislators and couldn't get past or didn't even attempt to pass national laws enshrining Roe nationally. To you both, should voters trust an independent voice like yours more? Mr. Yager?
I'll say yes. Even many Democrats have made the argument that for decades, the Democratic Party has used Roe more as a fundraiser than anything else. They've attempted, they used it cynically to try to raise money and to win elections. And for decades, it worked, and it worked until it didn't. And now Roe has been overturned. They were willing to basically not take any action in this. And I remember even Kamala Harris saying something to the effect that they didn't think that it would get overturned. Like, you know, the Democratic Party's leadership didn't think it would happen. Well, it was a project that was going on since 1973. You know, it was something that conservatives started in 1973, and they worked on gradually until they won. I think they may have thought that they were bluffing, just as they were, that this was something that they were just grifting off of pro-life voters, and they may have thought that way, but it turns out that they weren't. The Green Party believes in codifying Roe v. Wade. We take a strong stance in that. We do not. This is not something that we would use as a fundraising opportunity. We simply believe that it should be codified because it's the right thing to do, and we believe that abortion bans. I mean, we understand that some people believe in them for sincere and well-intentioned reasons. But they do more harm than good, and they end up being a much greater infringement on civil liberties than some people had originally thought they would.
Mr. Oliver?
Mr. Shea.
Yeah, so I am pro-choice, and libertarians pretty much across the board are by and large pro-make your own choice, so long as you're not harming anybody else. And we do believe in the most local governance, which is your own self-governance and bodily autonomy, which are paramount to liberty. And so if I were president of the United States and a bill to codify Roe v. Wade and Casey into law were to cross my desk, I would absolutely sign it. I would support that standard as well as the viability standard and having a doctor's say so post viability for the health or life of the mother. I think that's where most Americans are. I'm a libertarian. I don't support taxpayer funding of abortion. Obviously, I don't support taxpayer funding of a lot of things. I'm a libertarian. But I think there's also things we can actually do with the pro-life community to create less abortions in this country. We can make birth control over the counter so more people can access contraception more easily. and more readily. So there's no unwanted pregnancy to begin with. We can reduce the red tape and regulation around adoption, so more people can become surrogate or become adoptive parents, and more people can choose surrogacy as opposed to an abortion if that's where their conscience is, and if that's what they would like to do. But ultimately, we want to leave that decision in the hands of the individuals themselves and their own bodily autonomy and their own decision making. And I'm somebody who thinks that I would not want a doctor's office rather to be invaded, that most private decision making that's between an individual, their partner, perhaps their own conscience, their God, and of course in consultation with their doctor. I just don't want to put the government in there. I think there's not really any room for them to be invading that very personal space, that very personal decision making. And so as a libertarian and as the candidate for president of the United States, you can rest assured that I'm not going to be playing political football with this. I would pass it as soon as I could. And I think right now we're especially seeing some very giant hypocrisy out of the hands of Donald Trump, who went to the March for Life and claimed he would be the greatest pro-life president. But now, because it's not politically expedient anymore, and he's seen that the voters are rejecting abortion restrictions, is now all of a sudden, well, I want more weeks, I want this, I want that. Oh, everybody wanted it to go to the states. That's not true. Most people want a federal standard for abortion rights, and I would support that as president of the United States.
Now, speaking on this particular issue and the role of the federal government and states and even possible local governments here, they kind of bickered on bans during the debate. Harris and Trump did, but on the role of reproductive rights and the national government and how it supersedes state and local governments. Mr. Yager, starting with you, how should the national government actually act on this? What do you see the role is?
Well, I see our role as codifying Roe v. Wade. It's very simple. It's very straightforward, and I don't really see us as having much of a role for the federal government beyond that, except in situations perhaps where states are not actually complying with Roe being codified. Then there would be a role for the government to actually prevent in actually enforcing the codification. We should also actually have consistent health standards so that abortions are safe. As safe as possible. We want to actually have the best and consistent health standards, and that is possible.
Yeah. So, with regards to most things as a libertarian, I like to take things to the most local government possible, unless the Constitution prescribes that as something that's a responsibility of the federal government. I do believe abortion falls into the right to privacy. And there's a couple of amendments that kind of apply there, despite what I think the Supreme Court has said. I think really clearly the right to privacy exists in medical privacy, and that exists in the private decision-making you have. Which is why abortion should be legal at the federal level. It's not something that should be from a state-to-state basis, in my opinion. That being said, much of what the federal government does today, they shouldn't be doing, because those powers are enumerated to the states or to local governments or to individuals. And so, while I'm supporting things like codifying Roe v. Wade nationally to support a national standard of privacy and bodily autonomy, which again is paramount to liberty, I do think much of what the federal government does today, they shouldn't be doing. That should be, at worst, a state level issue, and at best, an individual decision making issue, which is why we have things like the war on drugs that needs to be taken away federally, just as one great example of, I think the only decision maker on whether you take a drug or not as an adult should be your own conscience and your own decision making, and not some federal government's law determining those things, or really even a state government. But we're getting into the philosophical weeds a little bit as a libertarian there, but ultimately I would be looking at what is my role and responsibility as the chief executive of the federal government, and anything that is being done outside of that auspices, I will seek to relinquish that power. And one thing I can guarantee you is, if I'm elected president, the office of president will be a weaker office than the day that I took over as president, because there's a lot of power currently residing in the White House that needs to be relinquished back to the states or back to the legislature to provide their proper role in our federal government.
All right, Mr. Arrington.
Thank you, Conrad. So, gentlemen, another key issue that is on the ballot this election is immigration. and especially border policy. Now, this topic is quite important to both Harris and Trump, but they both seem to be running hard towards the image of border strength. Trump cuts his teeth on anti-immigrant rhetoric and a wall with deportation. Then the Biden administration deported more, was just as harshly belligerent to migrants, including Haitian refugees, and is now actively fighting for a border bill which resumes wall funding and tries to curtail the asylum policy. Now, Trump wants to round up and deport 21 million people, which naturally won't all be illegal immigrants. Why this harsh tone? And why even allow the slightest negative rhetoric on people wanting to live here in this great country? Like J.D. Vance and Trump amplified by lying about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. Mr. Yager.
Mr. Yager.
Well, I do believe that he thinks this is going to win him votes. I mean, that's he's willing to say practically anything that he thinks would win him votes. Like, for example, his flip-flopping on the abortion issue. I mean, he's willing to say practically anything about that. I do believe that both parties, we look like we do see that they're trying to outcompete each other in being tough in this issue. And basically what happens is the Republican Party was really hammering hard in this, and over a few cases of people of undocumented immigrants who committed crimes. But this is something, and then basically they really drummed up a lot of concern about this from their supporters. But the thing is, we have to keep in perspective that really this is a very small percentage of the crimes in the country. I mean, this is not something that it needs to be put in its proper perspective. And we need to basically, I see from the Green Party's perspective that we, instead of all this rhetoric about Haitian immigrants eating your cats, I think what we need to do is to focus more on basically stop ending a foreign policy that creates migrants in the first place. Many people are coming to the U.S. because of all the wars the perpetual wars that we fight abroad, and then like millions of Syrians and Iraqis were displaced by our wars, but in the Middle East. And I do want to say that Jill Stein actually owns a cat, so I really don't think that cats would be in any danger under her administration.
Mr. Jackson.
First thing that I want to definitely get across is that immigrants are good for this country, which is something you're not hearing from the Trump administration or from the Trump campaign. You're not really hearing it from the Biden administration, who's tacking to the right, trying to follow suit with the Trump administration on immigration. Immigrants provide jobs, they build businesses, they create and add to the economic pie, and that is a good thing. Immigrants, on average, both legal and undocumented, commit less crime than native-born Americans. So if you want to make your communities safer, invite immigrants to live among you because they commit less crime on average. We're actually near historic crime lows. This idea of a migrant crime wave out of Donald Trump is created out of whole cloth xenophobia, the same thing that's causing him to go on a debate stage and saying that they're eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio. Let's be real, they're not. And I'm looking forward to actually traveling to Springfield, Ohio to meet with the Haitian community very soon to actually show them that there are compassionate people who believe in the power of immigration, who believe in the contributions of immigration. And the Libertarian Party is one such party. We believe in the free movement of labor, capital, goods, people, whatever, across those arbitrary borders and letting the marketplace determine where labor is needed, where people need to go, where the opportunities are, and not centrally planning that out through some complicated, costly, overly abusive and intrusive immigration program that puts people in misery at our southern border. And I've traveled there 3 times now. I've seen the facilities where people are being housed. I've seen the conditions in which people have to live as they wait for their amnesty day in court. We need to streamline this process with a 21st century Ellis Island that asks people to come through a port of entry, declare who they are, do a quick background and medical check, and then let them come on in with documentation to work. That way, they're no longer in danger of driving down American wages. They're competing in a level playing field. They're bringing communities out of the shadows, and we're not going to spend trillions of dollars invading people's privacy, their civil liberties, to deport millions and millions of people who shouldn't be deported, who contribute to the American public, who contribute to the American economy. I will fight for immigrants, and I look forward to being a voice for them as a candidate for president, unlike the president of the United States, unlike his vice president who's running for president, and unlike the former president who is a xenophobic commander-in-chief and will do everything he can to denigrate the good, hardworking immigrants in this country.
Conrad.
Trump would go on to be asked about his deportation plan and lingered in his response to the point of saying crime is through the roof. No, but crime is not through the roof. It's trending downwards. So what's the accurate way to view crime in the U.S., and should federal campaigns do more on criminal regulations? Mr. Yager.
Oh. We need to put things in perspective. Crime is much lower than it was 30 years ago. And much lower. This is, even if there may have been like a small uptick in the past year or two, which I don't think there was. I believe crime actually went down in 2023. That is really, it's much smaller than the decrease we've had in the past 30 years. We need to put that in perspective. The Green Party would continue to help bring it down, but through funding community-based youth programs. But we do not want to add a whole bunch of new offenses. Like during the 80s and 90s, it was really fashionable to create a whole bunch of new offenses. For example, that made it, if you used a gun during a drug crime, it made the sentence 3 times as long. So this one guy who bartered a gun for drugs got 20 extra years for that. That was just absurd. And we don't need those sorts of things. We want to also bring down white collar crime. We want to pass the Wage Theft and Recovery Act. And we want to point out that the lack of accountability for financial crime during the Great Recession caused people to not believe in the system as much anymore. And that's one of the reasons why we got Trump. It's also important for government to follow the laws. That's why we favor ending qualified immunity for prosecutors and police and ending police militarization. It's the same. If you look at the response to the protests in Gaza, to the protest, the response to to nonviolent civil disobedience, it was the same sort of response that police used to bring against like literal riots against the Vietnam War. I mean, it is an escalating response to a protest that is actually much milder, and this is criminality by our police. This is criminality by our government. We have to actually stop that. That's actually, I find that actually much more dangerous ultimately to our civil liberties and to our country as than street crime.
Mr. Chase.
Yeah, so as we've said, crime is actually down. It's not going up. It's not like we're in this criminal, hellhole that Donald Trump wants to make it seem like. In fact, when Donald Trump was my age in the 1980s, he was more likely to be mugged walking around New York City than I would today walking around New York City. Crime was at a much higher rate when Donald Trump was in his 30s and 40s back in the 1980s. But today, crimes are near historic lows, and we need to actually be celebrating that. But we can also do is focus ourselves on crimes that have force, fraud, coercion, theft, or violence, and get rid of the victimless crimes off the books that currently exist. Things like crimes against sex work, the drug war, and other crimes that really ought not to exist. We need to be filling up those jail cells with those who are actually committing crimes that harm people. And we can do that, and we can also defend people's civil liberties with a Department of Justice that's actually focused on that and not punishing the American people for private behaviors in which they engage that might disagree with our supposed moral values. And this is what we need to re-engage ourselves with when it comes to criminal justice reform in this country. We need to end qualified immunity at the federal level. We need to make a requirement for officers to hold liability insurance, so when they do wrong and if there's a payout in court, it doesn't come out of the services of the taxpayer, it comes out of a private insurance policy that can actually be an incentive to get bad cops off the street, because when you're uninsurable, you're no longer able to work as a federal law enforcement officer. And we need to use the bully pulpit to ask that states follow suit. We need to end the death penalty in this country, which just today, Just today in Missouri, a man was put to death, even though the prosecutors who prosecuted him recommended that his execution be stayed. The Attorney General of Missouri did not listen, and neither did the governor. Now another man is dead who is likely innocent of the crime. We need to outlaw the death penalty federally and join many nations around the world that have done so. The nations that still have the death penalty are China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and a few others. Nearly every other nation on earth that is our ally has ended the death penalty, and we need to join that community of nations and not stay in a community of nations of tyrants that kill their own population.
Now, Mr. Arrington, before you get to your next question, I want to let actually Mr. Yager tap in on specifically the death penalty, what happened today in Missouri, Green Party thoughts, all of that.
A travesty. It was a travesty. The execution of a man whom even prosecutors thought was innocent. This is why we believe, this is why the Green Party opposes the death penalty. We strongly oppose it. I personally, I don't know where Jill Stein stands personally, but where she stood early in her life, but I used to support the death penalty personally. And I've just come to see that there are better alternatives. I've come to see that all too often that mistakes were made that cost people's lives, and we need to end it. We also need to make it, as I've said previously, we need to make prosecutors and police more accountable, so that way people aren't put in the situation where they're on death row because a prosecutor suborned perjury, or because a cop hid some evidence, or basically twisted someone's arm into testifying like, against someone when they testifying falsely against someone. We really have to stop this sort of thing.
Yeah. Amen. I'll agree with that 100%. And I'll say there's a lot of agreement here between the Green Party and Libertarians in realm of criminal justice reform. One more area that I am in particular hits very close to home to me here in Atlanta is the Stop Cop City movement, to which I know Jill Stein has lent her voice. I do want to give her credit there for doing that. I've been really involved in the referendum movement there, trying to stop the facility from being built. And unfortunately, we're having to fight a year later to even get the referendum on the ballot to respond to our government. So I just wanted to go ahead and say a message of solidarity there as well with many criminal justice reforms. I think that's one area that if me and Jill Stein got on a stage together, there'd be more agreement than disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Props to that, Mr. Arrington.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, Vice President Harris is on 2019's record wanting to ban fracking. Now is quite supportive of fracking while maintaining on-air of green policy. Trump is a fan of drilling and deregulator in chief by rhetoric, notably with deli meat that is now showing its face with listeria outbreaks, which have killed and sickened people. Are the two main candidates treating this issue related to the public safety from climate and improper business practices responsibility? Mr. Yager.
No, not enough is being done on this. The Biden administration believes that it can have it both ways. That it can cause the world's biggest energy producer and talk about record oil production, while at the same time talking about reducing global warming. You can't have it both ways in this. What Jill Stein favors is a Green New Deal. She favors a Green New Deal that would get us to zero net emissions by 2035 of greenhouse gases. And we believe that this is something that's comprehensive. It's going to be something that would be a very large scale issue, but it's something that needs to be done. And we also believe that not enough is being done on health and safety standards. For example, for years, how long it took for anything to be done on the Flint water crisis. And there's this is like more than 50 years after the Clean Water Act is passed, that we are still lots of places in the United States are still in want of clean water. And it's something that it's something that the government has really fallen short of its promise on. And we do believe that more needs to be done on safety standards as well, including, and when you look at OSHA, for example, there are far too few inspectors to actually cover even like a small fraction of the businesses to inspect for safety reasons. That's something that we need to do much more about.
Mr. Oliver?
So when it comes to global warming, first and foremost, if we want to reduce the carbon emissions in the United States, we need to look at the greatest polluter in the United States, which is the United States military and the military industrial complex. Reducing a lot of Pentagon spending will take a lot of carbon out of the air. But when it comes to energy production, we need to stop subsidizing all forms of energy. The greatest form of energy we do subsidize right now is coal, oil, and natural gas, carbon-based energies. And we do this while also hamstringing and over-regulating the nuclear marketplace. I say deregulate energy and ultimately desubsidize energy and let them truly compete in a free market. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one's going to win, but I can predict to you that nuclear is going to have the largest impact in terms of getting carbon off of the table. It is relatively clean. Any waste that's produced can be stored and moved around and dealt with as opposed to carbon with expensive carbon capturing technology that often takes a lot of energy to even run those technologies. It requires less land footprint than, say, solar or wind power and can produce great amounts of power. And today's modern plants using thorium salt reactors can actually reuse previous waste to generate energy. And there are new nuclear power plants that are much smaller in terms of the land scale used that can be powering small cities and towns up to 50 or 60,000 people, one of these much smaller nuclear power plants. But ultimately, I think the solution to the climate crisis is not going to be centrally planned from government. It's going to be when we unleash the free market and the innovation of people to basically innovate our way out of carbon-based fuels, which is why I think we need to untie the hands of nuclear energy. When it comes to things like food and other safety and efficacy programs, one of the things that I think is tying the hands of people the most is tort caps on punishing those who would pollute or poison our food systems or other things, because the government has basically regulated itself to create tort caps that are, by the way, recommended by the lobbyists for these large chemical and large food companies, because they know that's only a slap on the wrist to them. What we want to do is remove these tort caps so that way citizens can sue these companies in a court of law with a citizen jury who will bankrupt them for poisoning people, for poisoning our air, poisoning our water, poisoning our food supply. If we did that, we could put the worst actors out of business, reallocate their resources to honest firms that are actually going to be serving the American people and not just the bottom line interest of their shareholders, and not doing whatever they can to get away with polluting the air, the water, or our food system.
Now, Trump and Harris were both asked about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. The humanitarian crisis of our time will hit a year long on October 7th. The failure of American power to stop this crisis is pretty glaring, but it set aside the fact we're arming and funding the side creating the crisis. Harris has a softer tone than Donald Trump, but should voters trust either one of them to preserve human rights in the region? And we'll begin with Mr. Yager.
No. Kamala Harris is part of an administration that for a year has had the tools had the power to stop Israel's war crimes in Gaza, and has refused to use them. I mean, it's not that it can't use them; it won't use them. We found that over the years, when the U.S. actually threatens to cut weapons off to Israel, then they really stop with what they're doing. For example, Reagan used it during the 1980s in Beirut, when bombing there became indiscriminate by the Israelis. But the U.S. does not want to do that. The Biden administration doesn't want to, nor does Congress. And they're actually violating the law in order to keep weapons flowing to Israel. Recently there's a news item that came out that showed that the State Department, or a couple of agencies in the government, concluded that Israel was blocking humanitarian aid. blocking our humanitarian aid, and that is, it is against the law for us to keep funding countries that are doing so. But Blinken and the other higher ups in the government decided that they weren't going to hold Israel accountable for that. That this is lawlessness. Our own government is ignoring its own laws for the benefit of a foreign country. This is lawlessness, and we've basically torn down the entirety of international law on behalf of Israel. We've said that Israel can basically violate whatever international law it wants, while saying that Russian war crimes are war crimes. If we use the standards that we apply to Israel, we would simply ask Putin to investigate himself for Russian war crimes. But we don't do that. We're allowing, in Israel right now, we're allowing Israel to run rampant, and this is really destroying our standing in the rest of the world, and especially in Arab countries. This is it is something that's in addition to all the death and destruction that's causing. I mean, even from a purely selfish point of view, it is hurting our standing in the world.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, we in the Libertarian Party advocate removing military aid from all over the world. Israel is no different. But if we look at October 7th, right, October 7th was a horrible day for the people of Israel. And I think if that had happened in our country, we would be expecting our government to have some sort of response. But the response which Israel has taken, that has killed tens of thousands of innocent people, destroyed billions of dollars of infrastructure, displaced hundreds of thousands of people from their homes in Gaza, created misery for the entire population there, is so heavy-handed in its response that it's actually making it more dangerous for the average Israeli, because it's inflaming tensions around the Arab world. It's losing goodwill for the Israeli people because of the actions that have been taken by the Netanyahu government. This is making it less safe to be the average Israeli. They should have had a much more surgical response to answer to the attacks that happened on October the 7th. And that would have actually created more goodwill around the world and showing that Israel can restrain itself. What we are not seeing here is that restraint. We're seeing actually escalation. And that is something we need to be speaking out against. We do not want to see an escalation in the Middle East. We want to see a removal of militarism in the area. We want to see a push for peace. But sadly, it's going to take, I fear, a removal of the Netanyahu government. It's going to take the Israeli people replacing their government to find a government that's more interested in peace than war, more interested in love than blood. And the same is going to have to be said for the people of Gaza, who need to reject Hamas, obviously, and find themselves in a position to find leadership, to find somebody who can come to the table and actually create some sort of peaceful future for both of these populations, because both of them are not being led well by the people who purport to represent them. The innocent and average Palestinian is not being well represented by Hamas. The innocent and average Israeli is certainly not being well represented by Benjamin Netanyahu and his wartime cabinet. I think it's time for both populations to reject the wartime tone and embrace leaders who will actually call for peace. And the United States cannot force that. We cannot lay a heavy hand on this, because when we do, it's seen as putting a thumb on the scale. It's seen as colonialism and intervention into this population. We need to be taking hands off here and allowing these people to come together. Yes, we want to see the release of the hostages. Yes, we want to see a ceasefire, but we also want to see a stopping of airstrikes that could be blowing up the very place where these hostages are, that could be doing harm to those hostages. We want to see a true peace plan moving forward, and neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris has the spine to actually fight for these things. Instead, they capitulate and they give blind trust, and they throw out jargon to support militarism, death, and destruction in the Middle East. And I think it's time for that to stop. Certainly not at the behest and not in the name of the U.S. taxpayer and the U.S. citizens.
Mr. Arrington.
Now, Ukraine hasn't been pushed off the back burner either. The U.S. has invested large sums into Ukraine and surrounding NATO countries to blunt Russian belligerence. Is there an end in sight, Mr. Yager?
Well, first of all, I want to say that in spite of everything that's been said about Jill Stein, she does believe that Putin is a war criminal. She has stated that, and she stated that a couple of times. But however, that does not mean that what we're doing now is the right answer. We have to negotiate a solution, because right now what's happening now isn't working. Russia has the ability to escalate much more than we do in the region. And as the war goes on, we spend more and more money, and more Ukrainians die, and Ukraine's military position worsens and worsens. And basically, the terms that it's going to get from Russia are going to get worse and worse. The U.S., when it had the chance, it should have actually supported the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in 2022 that would have led to a peaceful solution. It would have actually gotten Russian troops out of most of Ukraine in return for Ukrainian neutrality, which is probably the best solution that we're going to get, because Ukrainian membership in NATO is a red line to the Russians. We have red lines ourselves. Our government has red lines. We have to accept that other countries have them too. And we have other countries that are powerful will have them. We simply actually we actually have to accept that the U.S. actually has limitations on its power. We won't be able to force Ukraine into NATO, and even if we did, it would come at an extremely high cost to Ukraine. I mean, our government really seems to be interested in fighting to the last Ukrainian to make some sort of point, but that's not what we should be doing. We really need to get a negotiated solution to this, because right now what we're doing right now is not working, and we cannot have the entire world as our sphere of influence. It doesn't work. It's not possible. We have to accept limitations in our power, and we need to negotiate, even though we may not like Putin.
Mr. Oliver.
Yeah, so I think, certainly we've already given hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military aid to Ukraine. I think if there's any more military aid that needs to be going to that country, it shouldn't be coming out of the United States. Western Europe should, who is the most directly threatened by Putin moving westward, should really be taking the lead there. What the United States needs to be doing is demonstrating a different kind of policy towards Ukraine, one that's based in humanitarianism and getting innocent people out of the war zone. We need to be allowing for sponsorship of refugees to come to the United States to get as many innocent Ukrainians out of the field of fire as quickly as possible, to allow them to stay here and settle until the war has ended. And then we also need to be making the same offer to any Russian conscript who's being forced to fight in Putin's army against their will as a conscript, a forced conscript. We need to be allowing them to lay down their arms, declare amnesty, and allow them the offer of amnesty to come to the United States. What this will do is it will demoralize the Russian front lines. It will have many people escaping from Putin's tyranny and forced conscription, which I believe conscription is slavery with a gun. I don't support the draft here in the United States for the exact same reason. But I think if we do those two measures, we can weaken the resolve of the front line of the Russian military, create conditions that will be more likely to suing for peace, while also getting as many innocent Ukrainians out of the war zone as possible. Again, if the Western European nations want to take the lead on arming militarily, they need to do that as we exit ourselves from NATO. I don't think we need to be entangling ourselves in foreign alliances that necessitate us getting involved in military conflicts halfway around the world when they're not in the national security interests of the United States. Which is why my policy, again, of non-interventionism is consistent as a libertarian, even though I'm happy to call out the atrocities of Vladimir Putin. I'm glad to say that I'm able to say he's an authoritarian, tyrant, disgusting war criminal, just as our government is full of war criminals, as the Israeli government is full of war criminals, as the Palestinians being represented by Hamas are committing war crimes. Every major head of state around the world in one way or another has committed crimes against its own people. This is why I oppose the state, and I'm a libertarian, and I support individualism and freedom from the state. Because I don't like war crimes being done in my name. I don't think Ukrainians like it being done in their name. Russians don't like it being done in their name, and so on and so forth. So let's fight for a better foreign policy that's rooted in peace and diplomacy.
All right. For the sake of time, I want to see if we can condense our next couple answers down from 2 minutes down to one. We only got about 2 questions left. Trump was asked if it were prudent to weigh in on racial identities of his opponent. Harris would respond in saying it's sad Trump tries to divide people. But on these issues, are both the Republican and Democrat parties actually doing the right things with enough qualities to end racial division and inequity in this nation? We begin with Mr. Yager.
No, the rhetoric about immigration is bad enough, and there's yes, especially Trump, but also the Democratic Party with trying to outdo each other with being tough on immigration is actually stirring up racial divisions. It's not good for our country. It's making things worse. And I also like to add that the Democrats and Republicans are, although Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are equally abhorrent, both the Democrats and Republicans seem to be actually treating Islamophobia as much worse than anti-Semitism. And there's very little that's being, no, I'm sorry, the other way around. I'm sorry. There seems to be very little done against Islamophobia and much more done against anti-Semitism, even though both are equally abhorrent. I mean, it's something, and I do believe that this is not good for the country. I mean, like, you see Congress taking also purely one-sided denunciations of things of things that are anti-Semitic, whereas almost nothing about Islamophobia. This is also contributing to racial divisions, I believe.
Mr. Oliver.
Yeah, one of the greatest racial inequities in this country is through our criminal justice system. And let's be realistic. Joe Biden made his name on the 94 crime bill. Kamala Harris made her reputation prosecuting using the 94 crime bill. And Donald Trump funded those and supported those who supported the 94 crime bill. The truth is both parties have dropped the ball when it comes to that most important issue. It's created the most systemic inequalities in terms of how we interact with our government, which is in the court of law, sentencing disparities and other things. And I don't think Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris is truly ready to face those issues and really make any meaningful reforms. I will say this. I think it's great that Kamala Harris is running as a woman, as is Jill Stein. I think it's great that Kamala Harris is someone of Indian ancestry as well as being African American. I think it's wonderful that I'm the first LGBTQ person to run across the country. But I don't want anybody voting for me solely because I'm gay. But I do think it's nice that young gay people can see a gay person running for office and do so with confidence. I think it's great for young women to see women running for office. I think it's great for racial minorities to see people representing them, so that way our legislatures and our government actually represents the patchwork quilt that is American diversity. I think that's a good thing. But I don't think either party is really doing a lot to address the systemic issues that affect this country, and certainly that affect those with black and brown skin or who are the lowest in the economic ladder. And certainly not in terms of the way we interact in the court of law in this country. And it's a damn shame. And it's something that needs to be called out more.
Mr. Arrington, last question of the night.
Yes. So Trump's concepts of healthcare plan came up in the debate to a laughing reaction to those at home. Now, Vice President Harris had it brought up. She used to be for Medicare for all. Now she runs on only strengthening the Affordable Care Act and private insurance options. Should Americans be happy with only those options on your healthcare system, Mr. Yager?
No, we favor Medicare for all. There's still 27 million uninsured in the country, and there's tens of millions more who are actually underinsured, who have trouble using their insurance because their deductible and their copays are so high. We see that other countries are spending a lot less on healthcare than we do and are getting better outcomes in terms of life expectancy, for example. That's something that we really think that this is the best way to move forward with this. It helps. It would actually be better ultimately for consumers who would reduce some serious inefficiencies in the economy, because there's actually some things there are actually a lot of loss from insurance companies, which are simply dead weight losses. These aren't something that accrue to businesses rather than consumers. This is simply things that are lost, period, like through inefficiency, like what happens with monopolies.
Mr.
Oliver.
Yeah, so I do not favor Medicare for all plan as a libertarian. I think you'd be surprised if I did as a libertarian. But one of the things I do support is not just having a concept of a plan, but actually having concrete proposals that we think can lower the cost and impact of healthcare on people across the board. removing the cap on health savings accounts, which currently capped around $4,000 for an individual, even though the average individual spends about $13,500 on healthcare each year. Remove the cap altogether, so that way any healthcare spending you're doing is free from taxation, removing the Uncle Sam impact on your healthcare spending. Allow people to buy health insurance across state lines, so there's actually more competition in the marketplace to drive down those costs. Allow us to buy drugs over international boundaries. That way we can actually bring the cost of drugs down and more in line with where it is in Canada and Europe, as opposed to the artificially bloated cost of drugs here in the United States, because we allow basically insurance companies to pick up that tab. And then, of course, it trickles right down into our premiums, making things more expensive across the board. In the process of patent evergreening, which allows things like insulin to stop having generics come on board, which would drastically lower the cost of drugs for many people. And also, let's support competition to the traditional employer-based health insurance model, things like direct primary care models paired with catastrophic insurance that can compete in the marketplace. And let's try to remove people from the health insurance marketplace based on your employer. Let's base it on regional pools as opposed to being stuck in your job. Allow that health insurance to travel with you from job to job, so you're not trapped in a job that you don't actually like because you have a good health care plan there. And so I think those are things we can do that will lower the cost of healthcare across the board, that don't involve a government takeover of healthcare. I recognize the Greens will definitely disagree with me on that one, but certainly I have much more than a concept of a plan. Libertarians have actual plans that we would like to see initiated.
All right. To the best of our ability, let's give ourselves some closing statements, beginning with Mr. Yager, right around a minute if we can, for our respective campaigns.
All righty. Okay. Jill Stein stands for she wants to stop funding the forever wars abroad, restoring our civil liberties at home through ending unconstitutional mass surveillance like the Patriot Act. She wants to stop insurance companies ripping us off by giving us single payer. She wants to confront the ecological crisis that would, by passing a Green New Deal that will bring us good jobs across the country. And this is probably Jill's last rodeo, but voting for her is only the first step. Every vote for her helps build a stronger party, a stronger alternative to the duopoly. In some states like Kentucky and Texas, getting even 2% for her would actually get us a ballot line, so we can run more down ticket candidates. Basically, vote for Jill, and then after the election, join the Green Party. Help us so that way we can elect more candidates at all levels of government and take our country back from the uniparty.
Mr. Chase.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. It was a great discussion to be had. I appreciate Tom coming on to represent Jill Stein. My name is Chase Oliver. I am the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States. I'll be on the ballot in 47 states and a write-in candidate in the other 3. Luckily, Chase Oliver is not a very difficult name to spell. So no matter where you live in this country, you can cast your ballot for the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States. I want to fight for each and every person's individual right to make their own destiny, to not rely on the government deciding for them what they can do, what they cannot do. And if you're living your life in peace, it's simple. Your life is your life. Your body is your body. Your business is your business. And your property is your property. It's not mine, and it's not the federal government's to make a decision for. And as long as you're living that life in peace, we believe in the most local governance, your own self-governance to decide for yourself how to live your life, how to express yourself, and the manner in which you choose to engage in this world. We believe in the power of the free market. We believe in the trillions of individual decisions of individual Americans is far more powerful than the decisions made by 435 members of Congress or that person who sits in the White House. Go to votechaseoliver.com to learn more about the campaign. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, and I thank you both for joining us today. Conrad, thank you again, my friend, Mr. Tom Yager of the Virginia Green Party, as well as Mr. Chase Oliver, who is the Libertarian presidential nominee. As you mentioned, he has his platform on there. I truly appreciate you both taking the time out your busy schedule to join us for a great conversation. Please be sure to continue to tune into SchezzWho, YouTube political show weekly on YouTube, as well as my program, the Arrington Gavin Show, weeknights at 11 p.m. on WDJY 99.1 FM Straight Talk, as well as on podcast platforms, all podcast platforms, and Rumble and YouTube. Again, y'all take care. Make sure you are registered to vote. Conrad, this is your program. Would you love to end it all for us?
I'd like to thank all 3 gentlemen for coming on tonight, giving us the reasons for running for president. And Mr. Arrington, thank you for co-hosting with me. I want those who are watching tonight to get ready and stay tuned for our next week's worth the program, because we're going to have a program about why vote for Kamala Harris and also why vote for Donald Trump. Stay tuned for that. You guys all have a great night.